Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, kings and queens of the land. Good morning, the royals. Good morning to the liberated zones of Faso, the liberated zone of Mali, the liberated zone of Niger, the liberated zone of Faso under the leadership of President Ibrahim Traore, and the liberated zone of Mali under the leadership of President Captain Asim Goita, and the liberated zone of Niger under the leadership of Colonel President Abdurrahman Tian. Good morning to KZN. Good morning to KZN, the liberated zone under the British colony, the liberated zone under the British colony in South Africa, KZN, under the leadership of President Zuma. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Mgonum Konto, and this is the Royal Opinion. Thank you for joining. Today we are talking about a lot of issues happening, ladies and gentlemen, kings and queens. Today we are talking about the interview of President Zuma at RT. Um, on RT, President Zuma's interview on RT. That's what we are talking about today. Thank you very much, Queen Precious Malaj, there joining us, saying live. Thank you very much. We're talking about today. We're talking about President Zuma's interview on RTFM. RTFM, not RTFM, RT Russia Today, which is a television station. It's a television station that talks about, it's actually a news station which is banned in South Africa. People who decided, there are other people who think they've got powers to decide what we have to watch or what we have to consume as black people in South Africa. There are powers that have decided that we can't watch RT Russia Today. We can't watch it. So they've decided that we can't. So I want to share an interview, this epic interview that President Zuma, it was sort of like a lecture. Let me just share it. This is what President Zuma gave to RT, Russia Today. It's an interview which turned into a political lecture at the end.
You're a prominent anti-apartheid political figure in South Africa who's been part of the African National Congress, which has recently expelled you from that political party. We know that you've challenged this issue. I just want to get what your views are, because globally, you have been known to be part of the ANC.
Well, there's a long story about that. If you ask that question, you are producing, we are making me to produce a very long kind of an answer. Firstly, as we have said, I joined the ANC at my young age. In fact, it was even before qualifying. I lied to the people who had to make me a member of the African National Congress. I was very young, just 17, when I joined. The reason why I did so, because the ANC is an organization that was established to liberate the people of this country. And it was established by the greater leadership of the black people in South Africa, when there was a clear apartheid kind of behavior that emerged from the British and the Afrikaners after the
He's talking about the formation of the ANC. The ANC was formed in 1912. The ANC was formed for the unity of black people. That's what President Zuma is referring to here. I'm actually going to.
Anglo-Boer War. It became very clear that whites who had come to South Africa were taking over the country in terms of governing it, doing everything. And the black leaders in South Africa, which included, among others, traditional leaders who were in charge of the country that was taken from them, but secondly, the pastors who were preaching here, as well as our learned people who came together to say we cannot be taken out of the participation of running this country as the whites had decided to do. Those who were in the leading part of this were the British, who had to plead with the Afrikaners to allow themselves to take out the black people from any leadership thing in South Africa. And it was a serious matter that led the blacks to say, let us establish one party that will defend our own kind of interests. And that's how the African National Congress was established. And therefore, everyone was a member. Later on the year, because life is life, I'm sure there were other political parties that emerged in one form or the other. But the first thing was that we should be out of any activity that determines those who must run the country. It was a deliberate thing done by people who were the people who just arrived, found us here living in peace. And that's why the struggle had to start in a different fashion at that time. Now, if that is the case, the ANC
White people came to South Africa in 1652, and from 1652 until 1912, black people were fighting as units. They were fighting alone as tribes, as different nations in Africa. In 1912, the black people in South Africa for the first time launched the first organization to resist or to fight against colonialism. Let me a little bit explain what is colonialism. A lot of people we take these terms very loosely. We think everybody understands. Colonialism is a system. It's when people who feel they've got stronger guns than others goes around other countries, capture their resources using force, capture their land, and um, make the people or capture everything in the land and make the people the way you want. That is colonialism. So the British came to Africa or to South Africa in the 1800s. The British divided Africa after slavery, after they decided that slavery was supposed to be abandoned. The British came to South Africa. So colonialism is a system which white people use, which is a criminal system, capturing other people's lands and controlling them entirely, stripping them of their culture. So neo-colonialism means the continuation of colonialism through the faces of black people, through systems that cannot be detected. Um, it's a continuation of colonialism. It's neo-colonialism. So these terms are important. Maybe that we explain so that when these terms are just thrown about, people are able to understand. They create. There's a difference between perception and reality. There's a difference between truth and fact. Uh, what you perceive at the end create the reality. So what they are doing is to create our reality.
ANC, therefore, was my organization. And I grew within that party. And I fought, and I joined the army when the army came to fight, which was now more the Afrikaners who were now saying, after they won for the first time the elections, they said they were going to apply what belongs to them in terms of their beliefs. That a black man is a black man, is not a complete human being. Only whites were real human beings. And that led to us leading to an armed struggle to fight. In other words, almost to go back to where we were defending our countries from the beginning. It's a long, very difficult and painful story of this country. Now, once that was done, then they indeed increased what was called, popularly known, that the life in South Africa between black and white was strengthened to make the blacks feel the pinch, feel that the people who were white were superior, we were inferior in whatever way. And therefore ended up with a situation where there was a thing called apartheid. In other words, dividing the whites and the blacks, that they cannot be the same. And there are a lot of details how oppression increased from what the British would have made a kind of a thing that you were sort of just saying, you are here, you are with us, but you are under us, that kind of stuff. That led us to become freedom fighters and struggle and become soldiers and everything. It's a long, long what to call. The main thing was that South Africa must be free. We must be equal. We must have everything in the same way as the white and the blacks. And it took a long time, I think the longest struggle in the continent of Africa. We became the first to start. We became the last to be, so to speak, free. The idea was to have South African free fully, equal to everybody. There's a way these things were done. For an example, when there was a decision that we should be free, should be equal, a lot of difficult things were said. For an example, to say that let there be negotiations, which was never done when our country was taken. There was no negotiations. It was taken by force. But given the passage of time, we had to deal with that. When we went for negotiations, and perhaps, unfortunately,
Let us remember, ladies and gentlemen, that we're talking about people who came in Africa, found people who stayed in the land, and they took everything. They took the land, they used the guns. Because they had powerful guns, they used the guns against the people. They took everything that the people owned. By then, we're talking about criminals, we're talking about mafias. We talk about uh, we talk about people who are merciless in their pursuit for money and power and resources. President Zuma here is talking about the fatigue of the war that happened during the 1990s. Thank you very much for joining, Commander Pace. Thank you very much, Nkosana Fulani, for joining. Good morning, the Royal Opinion family. I welcome myself to the Royal Opinion, where we get the best analysis, better than those mainstream media propagandist analysts. Hashtag one of the students in the class. Thank you very much, Mr. Fulani, for joining. And everybody else can indicate where and who is in the class. Everybody else can indicate who is joining, who is part of the class. Thank you very much for joining. So we're talking about tricky issues. In 1990, when the ANC, this is what actually happened. The ANC was sponsored by the Soviet Union, meaning the communist Russia, for the ANC to launch the struggle against apartheid. When in 1990, to cut the story short, in 1990, when Russia, when the ANC was supposed to take over power in South Africa, when the negotiations started, when the ANC was unbanned, when Mandela was released, the Soviet Union had collapsed, was collapsing in 1990, meaning the Americans have defeated the Soviet Union, the Americans have defeated Russia. And then the then president of Russia decided um, uh, that they will not be able to sponsor the ANC with intelligence and with money anymore. So they were basically in a very difficult situation. The ANC comrades were in a very difficult situation at that moment. There were comrades who were radical, like Chris Hani, Commander Chris Hani, but he was quickly eliminated by the system because they realized that it was going to be difficult or even next to impossible for them to implement the system they wanted while Hani was alive. Because he was talking against it and he was a very strong leader in the ANC. So the white people were powerful at that moment because they have defeated Russia. The ANC did not have money to continue with the war. They did not have their sponsors. The Soviet Union had collapsed by then. The power has shifted to the West. The ANC had to align themselves, sort of like the tactics which were used in 1990. It's the same. It's a coup kind of system. So the ANC had to uh, uh, align themselves with what white people wanted, which is the continuation of apartheid in another form, pretending like racism has ended, but continuing economic apartheid, continuing apartheid as it was and as it has appeared after 1994. Even worse crimes were committed after 1994. So we're talking about uh, the ANC, which had to negotiate, but at a very weak. They did not have power. They wouldn't continue with the war. They had to agree with the Afrikaners because they did not have money. They were fatigued as well. They were tired to be in the forest. The comrades were just exhausted, and they were not gonna be able to defeat the apartheid without Russia. And Russia was defeated by the Americans. So the ANC comrades that time when they were negotiating at a very awkward situation. When the negotiations in 1994 happened. So that's why there has been a compromise. And that's why some other comrades were eliminated who was against the measure, who were against the ANC giving power back to white people by that time. So President Zuma, that's the moment that is talking about it on this video.
Fortunately, I don't know. I was made to be one of the people who were part of starting that as a result of the decisions taken, and therefore agreed that we are going to negotiate. In other words, we are going to find a way where we could live together. But as we were negotiating, the time had been too much. The wars have been too bitter. And therefore, we had to sit and talk. How are we going to negotiate? And I think we agreed that we'll negotiate. And after negotiating, we will make the country come together, because we've been fighting, killing one another, arresting one another. Many people had died in jail, in the battles or whatever. A decision was taken, supported by the world, that we need to bring peace and put South Africa back to where it is supposed to be. As a result of that, we decided the first term would be very difficult to deal with, because the anger and the problem among us was too deep. So we'd make the first term to be run in terms of government in the country by all of us, black and white. Parties that will win a particular number will then be the ones who will be part of a government that will be put together. We called it government of national unity. Others were trying to unite these people who have been fighting for years. In other words, even the manner in which the agreements will be soft, to allow us to come together to allow, to accept that we can live together. After that first occasion, we'll then allow the party thereafter, after the first term, in the second term,
The ANC.
the party, whichever at the time, we did not know because we hadn't won. Whoever will win will be the one who will then determine how this country is run. And the party that emerged was the ANC. ANC, in other words, had its own policies, every other thing, that once we are in power, we will rule this country the way we want, which will be good for everybody else.
So they actually sacrificed President Zuma, putting it clearly there that they had agreed that when they were negotiating, it's okay if they can compromise the first term and allow all the white people to continue in government. But after that, the organization which is going to win the politics after that, then it's going to run the country on its own. That was the plan, and that is why they actually compromised on the issue of the economy and the issue of the land. They actually did not have power to persuade, because what was happening at that time, other comrades were threatened by death. Other comrades were already apartheid spies, and other comrades were bought. So at the end, this Mackenzie says 90% of the people who were negotiating there at Codesa were apartheid spies at the end of the day. So meaning the white people have won have managed to take their own people into the negotiating table. So it was impossible for the for the people to win. Obviously, it was for the white people again to win, because they have already infiltrated the ANC and put their own spies during negotiations there. President Ramaphosa is one of the people who emerged to play a big role in the negotiation, who was never actually part of the ANC freedom fighting uh, uh, mission. President Ramaphosa was never part of but he suddenly appeared uh, and led, uh, played a big role in the negotiations, and also played a big role in the drafting. I wouldn't say drafting of the constitution. He played a big role, but he was put there with other white people to pretend like they are the ones who were going to together draft the constitution, while the British drafted our constitution and handed it over to them for briefing, and they also had to brief the South African Parliament. So this is what President Zuma is actually uh, elaborating.
Then, once we came there, the movement to change was very slow. But nevertheless, everything times we needed to give it time, etc. I personally felt we were not rushing to change. There are things that are written in serious documents that we, when we are in charge of the country, this is what we will do. Very little of that was happened. I mean, just to put it mildly. We ended up with an emphasis on what we call the equal rights to everybody. That was done. But it was not actually done to do it. Some of the things that were supposed to be done, they were never done.
In the Freedom Chart?
The Freedom Charter, for an example, is a key document. If you look at it seriously, it was equal rights that were attended to in the Freedom Charter. What the Freedom Charter says was never attended to. And you would have felt, therefore, that with time we are going to address the issue. But the issue was never addressed up to this day. It's now 30 years. It has never been addressed. Instead, we were going backwards rather than going forward as this organization. Now, as the time went, it was worrying. We finally ended up with a situation where the leadership that came was no longer even thinking about anything. If anything, it was reversing many, many things. As a current
ANC.
ANC, I always forget this name at times.
I feel like I'm getting a political lecture from you at this point, His Excellency. I do want you to touch on that issue then, on that ANC that you mentioned that has made this journey to this point, which has expelled you, which you were part of. You joined at an early age of 17 years old, which has now expelled you. I know you've challenged this issue, but what are your views about them actually expelling you?
I'm starting like this because I want you to have a clear thing, because people at times misinterpret things. Even in that one, I'm going to come, because you started with at the beginning that I'm being challenged and I'm challenging people. It was part of this history that I'm talking about, wherein we're all together. We had all agreed what we need to do. When we reach a point where my colleagues were no longer moving, when I was at some point given an opportunity to be the president of this country, because I was beginning to implement what I fought for, what I took decision to die for. Once I started, I was criticized.
Some even put allegations of corruption under your tenure.
Exactly. And not a single one has ever produced even a stick of match that I stole anywhere.
Even with the revelations that came out from the State Capture Commission of Inquiry?
There's nothing. Even the man who was reading it has said today it was wrong. That tells you that everything that was done was cooked against me, probably, and other people. Because up to now, with regard to Zuma, nobody has said, this is what Zuma did, which was wrong. Nothing.
The State Capture Commission. Thank you, King Richard Mia, for joining in Betal. Thank you very much for joining the Royal Opinion, one of the channels which is very authentic and gives authentic kind of analysis. The analysis that you get here, it's not a repetition of what has been said before. If you have to say what has been said before, it's better not to talk. We talk things that have never been said before. We give analysis which has never been um, uh, um, spoken in another way. Royal Opinion being one of the channels which is highly censored by YouTube, prevented from growth by the YouTube itself, and sabotaged, quite frankly, by YouTube when we are actually live, because of the truth that we normally revealed in this channel. Thank you very much for joining, ladies and gentlemen. President Zuma, explicitly talking about how they were planning to free black people. The freedom, he was planning to achieve the freedom of black people, while he was trying to implement the policies of the ANC, which he believed in, which are radical policies to reform the economy, to take over the land, um, and to take over our own economy. President Zuma was rudely stopped by populist movements, white system which wanted him not to implement the programs that he wanted to implement. He was quickly taken out. The State Capture Commission, even today, did not produce any evidence against President Zuma. If any, there has been a lot of evidence against President Ramaphosa, but none against President Zuma. That's why at the end of the day, they couldn't pursue anyone on the state capture report, because it was just a waste of billions, more than 1 billion rand that Zondo has wasted on the state capture commission. Most of the money, we can say clearly that 85%, more than 80% of the money went to white companies. We can clearly say it went to white lawyers, paying white lawyers in the state capture commission, wasting money, South African money, which they are going to go and borrow from the IMF, so that the people of this land can continue to suffer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining. Let's continue to listen to President.
I have even gone to prison when I've never even appeared before a magistrate, let alone the judge. I served. It was all cooked. So I don't want to get into that one. I'm just telling you what.
He's talking about the fact that he was kidnapped by the state into prison, uh, without a trial, without um, doing anything wrong, without finding him guilty of anything, without giving him an opportunity to answer, without even taking him to court, just coming and picking him up because they had the guns and their guns were very strong. They sent their soldiers and police to go and take President Zuma to jail, just because he wanted to liberate black people, the man I call the supreme leader of black people, His Excellency President Jacob Kelly Zuma, giving a political lecture to the what we call journalist.
Who
I am
cooked it?
moving
Who cooked it?
those who are in power.
You are a political figure that has sources all around the country. You would have insight and some intelligence as to who cooked it.
I'm saying it was cooked by those who are in charge. I don't want to be counting names of people, how many. That's not the issue for me. They know themselves, and those who are helping them, uh, writing news and everybody, they also know.
Let me get this right before we move on to the next point, His Excellency. Are you saying the ANC that you joined before, during the apartheid era and coming into the democratic dispensation, is different from the ANC that you see today?
I was going to come to that, but since we want it now, yes, ANC that I joined is not the ANC that I left. It was a different kind of an ANC. I can say painful things about it. I don't think that is the way to deal with the matter. But to answer your question briefly, yes, the ANC that I joined, that I was prepared to die, that I went in prison for 10 years for, I went into exile for 14 and a half years. It's not the ANC that I left a few years ago. It is a fact. I was trying to make the picture become very clear. That when I joined the ANC, I was clear that I'm prepared to die to liberate my country. And once my country is liberated, how this country will be, how it will be governed, is as clear as anything. I don't want to tell you many other things. Being the former president, I was in a conference where I pulled my hand to make a contribution, and deliberately I was avoided until I could not put across what I thought. That was not the ANC. In the ANC, every member had the right to speak his mind or her mind. That's no longer the ANC I can talk about. So I don't want to dwell in those because it will make me discuss too many other things that are not that important.
Okay.
Because what I'm trying to say is that the reason why I took a decision is because the ANC was no longer the ANC I knew.
So what is the
I
difference?
could no longer put an opinion, even if when I put my opinion, it was put aside. And therefore, that is not the ANC. Was not the believing of the ANC that you can be deprived of your views as it is. I wouldn't want to get into that because the point I thought it was important was to say we reached a point where you could no longer do what you were doing when we were ready to die because we were no longer allowed to speak. The kind of leadership that emerged were wrong leadership. Perhaps if you'll be still around when I write my book, you must read it. I might be saying more things in details. What happened to the African National Congress of Tambo Mandela.
So what is the difference between the ANC then and the MK party?
No, before getting there, I want you to head it nicely because you just know that and not know any other thing. I made all the efforts. I did not just walk away from the ANC because I still wanted to correct it because it was an organization I trusted. But the people who were leading were no longer interested in that. They were doing another type of running of the country outside the serious policies of the ANC. And I could not stomach it.
Is that the current leadership of the ANC that you speak of, that you're referencing?
Absolutely. I'm speaking of them. Speaking of them, it's just 2 years I've left them. If not two, I'm getting to the second year, first year. That is what I'm talking about. They moved off the policies, the things that the ANC was established to do. And they were no longer listening if we wanted to say, can you put this thing right? I then took a decision to continue fighting for a complete free South Africa because the ANC was no longer the ANC. We now call it Gogo. You know what it means.
Grandmother.
Grandmother, exactly. Because, in other words, implementing the policies of the ANC was no longer the issue. The issue was to reverse it, including the poorness in the leadership itself. What they were saying, what they were talking about was no longer what we know.
It's interesting that you mention the policies of the ANC, which is now in a government of national unity with the Democratic Alliance that has different policies from the ANC. What do you make of this government of national unity? Is it reminiscent of that negotiation period which you alluded to, which you mentioned as a soft agreement, so to speak?
I wish I was just talking, not you asking many questions, because I'm coming to all of those questions. But there are good things we may not understand. Because if you talk about government of national unity of today, we are talking about many things that happened even before the ANC chose to take the enemy to be the comrade. Because if we jump, and I don't think we are going to get what I would want to, why I took a decision. The decision I took is not a small decision, it's a serious decision. I wouldn't have taken it. I respected the ANC. The very fact that I've said I remain a member of the ANC is a story of its own. Why would I do so? I thought I would go through a little bit of that so that when we come to this, we understand exactly what has happened. Firstly, a very funny president came in, very funny man, who came from the working class, as they call it, right?
President Zuma is a very polite man when he talks about, when he says a very funny man, talking about Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa is not really funny. Ramaphosa is a sellout, is a white project in South Africa. He is not being funny with us. He is implementing the policies which apartheid or the British wants in South Africa. Ramaphosa is very dry. He's a very dry politician. It's even difficult for even for media to decorate Ramaphosa. Like Ramaphosa cannot be decorated like by anything. He's too dull and too dry. uh, and he's a slave trader, a slave trader of note, a house negro, nigger, a house nigger. They call such people. Thank you very much, King Victor Shongwe, for joining. ANC lost its soul. Policies that are diametrically opposed cannot represent progress, especially considering economic transformation for the marginalized, landless natives. The policies, it's like it's like thinking that night and day can actually meet and peacefully so and exist at the same time. Good and bad can exist in one person at the same time. You are either good or you are either a bad person. Light and darkness cannot be able to exist at the same time. The Democratic Alliance and the ANC cannot be able to operate together at the same time because they are two opposed to each other, two different from each other, um, which they have been basically ANC was just bought and its policies have been hijacked by the Democratic Alliance. The ANC now called the GNU now implementing the policies of white people. Very shameful. Thank you very much, Mr. Shong, for joining. Let's continue to share.
Right? Whom today is always a mystery. How did he emerge up to becoming the president when there are people who had been there all the time? Are issues one day we might want to talk about. And I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about what made me to take a decision to leave the ANC. Not to leave it as a member, not to vote for it. Not to vote for it. And I made it very clear, even to them, that I'm remaining the ANC, but I'm not going to vote for the ANC. I'm going to vote for the new party, Umkhonto weSizwe Party, because they have deviated from the policies of the ANC in many respects, which, as I said, when I have time to write, I'll write to explain this for the sake of our history, because they moved away. But what is critical is that when it was difficult to do anything, I had no alternative but to continue to finish the liberation of our people. And that's what I decided to do. And I gave it a very serious thought, which at times our friends would not understand, not only outside of the African place, space, or whatever, that in fact, it was very difficult. But people who might not have been with us, they wouldn't understand why will a man like Zuma, who was ready to die, who went to prison and did everything,
For the
how
ANC.
could, for the ANC, but the ANC is an organization for the people of South Africa. If the ANC begins not to take attention seriously of the people of South Africa, then why are you there when you're not a leader? Because if I was still a leader, I would have said, okay, I'm now going this way. But I knew when I was a president, I was made to leave that office before I could finish, because those people who were doing that to me were clear that my being the president, I was quickening the process of changing or also implementing policies. And my comrades decided to conspire that I should leave before I finish, because I was messing up whatever that was in their minds. So it's not like something that happened now. And that's why if I talk about this, it's not a matter of just going over in not explaining what happened so that somebody will understand. Part of the reason, for an example, I said I would remain in ANC and I would fight, I would go to court as we are going to court. Because it was not the ANC I joined, it was not the people who died that I could have said, oh hell, with you guys, me, I'm gone. I had to remember them. I had to make what we took as decisions before to succeed. And therefore, the ANC, because if I say the ANC is now blah, and I will be, in fact, saying to the ancestors and everybody else, you were wrong. And I did not want to say that. I wanted to say, it is the leadership now that is wrong, not the first ones.
President Zuma, the only link we still have, the only link who is real, we still have to the real ANC of 1912. President Zuma, the only elder we still have in South Africa who speak the truth to power. The only freedom fighter who knows that freedom in South Africa has not yet been achieved. Apparently, is the only freedom fighter who knows that the objectives of those who were fighting for freedom has not been achieved. Uh, Rising to fill the gap, if President Zuma did not take the responsibility to fill the gap or to stand in the gap, South Africa, black people would be colonized again for another 200 years or so. This is recolonization project that the British and the Europeans and the Americans are actually engaged in. The economy, when you are attached to the matrix, they collapse the economy at some stage to rebuild it. They collapse the economy, they collapse all the investments to rebuild it. This is the time where they collapse everything in order to rebuild it. President Zuma, during the time of this collapse, uh, uh, interfering to disturb the enemy from rebuilding the apartheid system as he wants. He's the only man who is standing in the gap between the suffering of black people and the victory of white people over black people again. The victory of the slave master over the slaves once again. President Zuma is the only obstacle. His Excellency President Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma is the only man who is standing in the gap to save black people, to save Africa. West Africa as well, trying their best in the French colonies. Those three countries which are trying their best, but those three countries will not succeed if more countries are not joining in to become fighters as well. Let's continue to listen to President Zuma.
I thought I could not take that, a very rich history, and just forget about it. I want to remain in the ANC, but the real ANC, not the false ANC. That is the reason why I said I'll remain, and I'm still going to go to court to defend my membership card. I was not forced to join the ANC. I joined it voluntarily. And I'm proud of the ANC of the old, not the Gogos. The Gogos, and I'm defending the ANC from the Gogos. And that's what I'm doing. I just wanted to put it in brief so that you understand it. It is therefore, it was not just a question of, I think I don't like the ANC. No, I love it. It's the best organization that I've joined in my life. I spend a lot of time, but I cannot allow it to be abused by people who are deviating from the policies. That's the reason why when I decided to have an organization, because I couldn't just go and sit down, I thought I should think very carefully. Even the name of the organization, Mkhonto Wesizwe, it has its own history, which will appear in my book the day you read it. Why it was important for the name, and why it resonates so well with the South African people, because it tells the truth we know about the ANC and about those who died for the ANC. So, in a sense, people don't seem to understand how. I've been asked by my former colleagues in the continent who don't understand, because I did not shout this or say, now I'm doing this without knowing what I'm doing. How could you leave the ANC? And I've said, no, I left the rotten ANC. Very, 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 very funny. But the ANC I joined, that made us to liberate South Africa, I'm part of it. And therefore, I have a responsibility to correct the ANC, take it back where it is supposed to be, away from people who are not interested about where we need to arrive. That is the thing. I just thought I should explain these little ones at this point so that you don't worry to say why this happened. I tried my best. I can tell you more other details where I even sent a memorandum which was given by a branch in this province, asked me to do so because they were not listening. And I sent it, they acknowledged it, but just ignored it. So the reason why I established this party, and this party cannot go wrong, Mkondo Wesizwe, it's a well thought out party for a number of reasons that demonstrate how we, who were part of the ANC, understand the politics of this country and the ruling, the manner in which this country is ruled. It is absolutely critical. The ANC is no longer talking about what we used to talk about in the real ANC, about the people of South Africa. There is more starvation, more problems that you have, more poor people. There is no attempt to change the people, particularly the black people, so that they are part of a country that is rich, that is supposed to have everything, but they are deprived of that.
So let me ask you this then, before we move into global issues, His Excellency, what do you make then of the ANC working with parties like the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, and all these other smaller political parties in the GNU?
You know, if you just look at the GNU, it tells you the whole history, that we are dealing with the ANC leadership that could no longer differentiate between the oppressor and the oppressed, because it is a fact. Precisely because of Mkondo Wesizwe, which had more votes than anybody else. And that is still in court to deal with it. You had a situation where members, revolutionaries, believers on the liberation of a black person, and we could look into what is happening here in this country. The economy, you can count them by fingers, few fingers, black people who are big business people. It is all white. In 30 years, you can count.
The number of women in business, you can't even count them. You can't even feel your finger. Really, the women, the real women, not the people who are being fronted for the sake of looting the state, but the people who are actually doing business honestly, without being in any relationship with the powers that gives the tenders. You won't find them, because those are sabotaged and put aside and made their life made difficult. Black people's life, the red tapes that are put into black people making any sort of profit anywhere, the red tapes that are used to prevent black people from doing business with the mining sector, the black business, the corruption which is there, which is preventing the right kind of companies or the right kind of people to grow, and only promote the one with the strongest gun in the area to be the one participating. That's what is happening in South Africa. South Africa is still under is still a British colony, which is still black people are in deep suffering. Only few whites who are in control and enjoying the economy and the resources of the land.
Count them a few. We still suffer in many ways. And we go from elections to elections. There's almost a pretense that everything is well. Even when we say we are going for elections, we are no longer talking about the actual things that affects black people. And when there is almost like numbers are almost like together, and you want to change who will help one party to increase their numbers. And those revolutionaries go to reactionaries to say, let us be together and have the government of national unity. What are you uniting? What are you governing?
With the DA.
With the DA. DA has been the opposition all the time. The ANC move to join them, leave everybody else who's suffering. That tells you how much they are no longer caring of the poor white, poor black, who still need to be freed. It tells you the story. What is worse, the DA actually says it in public. This is not like a government of national unity. It's a government of between the two, ANC and them. Simple. That was just done to wipe off people from thinking this is serious. That actually worsens the situation. There are many people who are leaving that organization because of DA. Because DA is part of what oppressed us for many years. Just switched a little bit when we're here in a nice name, Democratic Party, I don't know what it is.
Alliance.
Alliance, whatever. That in itself must be telling somebody who can think that this is a fast. It's not the real thing. It's not there. People who are there are finding a way out, the way out. Because DA is DA, it's doing his own. Mlung phela. Akuyona enye into, it's a white fellow. In fact, it is, in my view, a disappointing thing. Because you take those people, they know nothing about how you work for democracy. And they represent us all over the world. We who disagree with them a great deal, we now disagree with ANC. Totally disagree. Decision that they took, it's not a decision which represents us as the majority. It represents them, a black minority working with the whites. It's not us. That is why it is our wish that our friends out there who knew the ANC and knew us, who are now in the Mkhonto Wesizwe, must be looking very carefully and ensure that they get the information. Because the fact that people say we are free, I don't know how much we are free in South Africa. I can tell you the long story about this country, that there's nothing that has changed. If yes, very little. The people who were
This is a very long interview. President Zuma telling the truth about the fact that South Africans are not yet free. The ANC has not yet achieved what they anticipated to achieve when they started the ANC. The ANC was started to unite black people and to defeat white system. The ANC has not united black people yet and has not defeated the white system. President Zuma taking the difficult road of uniting black people, the dream of the ancestors who formed the ANC in 1912 was to unite black people in fight against the white system. So President Zuma taking over from there, um, saying that black people should unite, uh, following the vision of their forebearers, their ancestors, and defeat the white system. The ANC has been kidnapped, has been changed into something else which black people can no longer recognize as their own. President Zuma has decided to stand in the gap and form the Umkhonto Wesizwe Party. Difficult as it is, ladies and gentlemen, even the YouTube, even here on YouTube, if you check all the people who are talking about MK on YouTube, all of them are out there. You can't see them appear anywhere. Those that you can see pop up are those who are promoting other things other than talking or promoting President Zuma. So the cleansing of the Zuma support on YouTube is happening. So channels like ours are basically censored and sabotaged for growth. So click the like button and subscribe to help us grow the channel. You can even assist us with finances if you can, to grow our channel. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining. I want to thank all of you, kings and queens, the royals, part of the royals, Victor Shongwe, Richard Mia, Nkosana Fulani. Commander Peace is the first time that is joining. It's the first time that I'm seeing. It may not be the first time that is joining. And Queen Precious, thank you very much to all of you for joining and for being part of this live stream. Click the like button and subscribe.